Welcome into CyHawk Talk here on a Wednesday, talking all things Iowa State, BYU, Iowa, and Minnesota. Ben, it's getting a little cooler here in Iowa. You had a little bit of that. Well, you had only cold weather action last year, really. So I guess how are you liking a little bit more of an eased into it situation? You kind of hit everything, running last year.
I did. I'm hoping for another mild winter. I guess that's kind of what we got last year, from what I'm told. So, knocking on wood for another one of those. It was kind of funny, walking out of the Jack Trice Stadium after the Arizona game, Ethan. You look at it and it's a nice warm day. It was hot on the field, and you think, man, the next time we're all going to be in Jack Trice Stadium, it's going to be a cold night probably for this big October matchup against BYU and then against Arizona State coming up. So maybe with the cooler weather, I don't expect any advantage over BYU, but those Sun Devils, it'll be curious to see how they handle it.
Is your home state. Montana's a little bit similar, repping the home state team today on the pod. But back in Montana, we're infamous for the weather changing quickly. Iowa, the weather changes similarly. It's pretty quick. And last week we were talking about 80-degree weather. Now we're looking at not even getting into the 60s anymore on the thermostat. Is that kind of what you're used to, or are you used to a more gradual ease into winter than maybe the immediate switch into the fall temps?
Yeah, I feel like every state, especially in the Midwest, but every state says, "Oh, our weather is you don't know anything about our weather." It's like, okay, every single state says that. So, I'm sure they're talking about it in Oklahoma the same way, except, when cold weather comes in at 50 degrees, it's more like 30 degrees here in Iowa.
Well, enough weather talk. I know that's not why people tune into the podcast. Ben, how about you go ahead and give us a little bit of a preview for what Iowa State fans can expect out of the number 11 ranked Cougars, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I am fascinated for this game. It feels like Iowa State's back is against the wall, against a great undefeated BYU team coming in here. Um, Cyclones have no room for error, and they've made a lot of self-inflicted errors these last couple losses, which is why we've seen these one-score games flip from Cyclone victories to Cyclone defeats. So I'm going to be watching what Iowa State's able to do in the red zone. Against Cincinnati and definitely against Colorado, Ethan, we saw the Cyclone offense move the football pretty well. I think they outgained the Buffaloes in total yardage. It's just this red zone, the red area, that the Cyclones have been running into trouble with. And I think they're going to get a big boost in that department from Kyle Konrardy. He's back. The kicker, the first string, a world of possibilities has now opened up for Iowa State once they cross midfield. Matt Campbell has been very political and diplomatic with how he's answered these questions. He says, yes, being down to your third string, even a fourth string kicker at a point against Colorado has been a unique challenge. I think Matt Campbell is maybe looking forward to getting the weapon that Kyle Konrardy is back more than anybody. So I think that also could benefit the Cyclones as, they attempt to win one of these one-score games with a field goal kicker. That's going to help them in the red zone.
I thought you were about to bestow the nickname of all nicknames on Kyle Konrardy there for a second, the weapon, and then you added the prepositional phrase there of Kyle Konrardy as the kicker. But I thought, I think we just go with the weapon there. The
I like
weapon
that.
has returned.
I like that. I like that.
BYU a couple of weapons of their own on the ground. Now, when I think about the Cyclones, maybe some issues in the secondary with injuries, maybe their pass defense isn't what they want it to be, but I haven't heard you really complain about the rushing attack. So is this maybe a place where it might be a strength for BYU, but it's not necessarily a weakness for Iowa State? Take me through this battle, this matchup between BYU ground game and Iowa State run defense.
I don't think, people think of Iowa State's rushing defense as necessarily a weakness. You have Big Citrus in there holding things down. He's so good at that. They play in this 3-3-5 front. So you're never going to expect Iowa State to be super stout against the run because that's kind of, the defensive scheme. But against Cincinnati, the Bearcats really exploited that. They were able to run all over the Cyclones in the first half. And the problem happened a little bit again in Colorado when Dominique Orange got hurt. So the big update from Matt Campbell's Tuesday press conference is we're going to have to wait and see on Orange's status. So stay tuned to the Quad City Times. You can check out the injury report story that we're going to get a little bit after we record. to see what Dominique's status is. And of course, that's so important when you go into this game facing BYU, the second best rushing attack in the Big 12, led by the conference's leading individual rusher in LJ Martin. A lot of that has been because BYU is ahead in games, especially the first 4 or 5 games they played. They were in a lot of positive game scripts where you would expect them to run the ball, but they've been able to do it effectively. So I'm going to be really curious to see if Iowa State's Russian defense can hold up, especially if Dominique Orange is unable to play or in any sort of limited capacity.
Now, if I remember correctly, Dominique Orange did get hurt at the end of a game earlier in the season, but I don't think he missed any time. Do you know if this am I correct in that?
It sounds terrible to say, Ethan, but I feel like he's gotten hurt in just about every game he's played. And yet he's managed to fight his way back on the field after halftime or the next week. So it's been kind of a tough deal with Orange this season. And he, of course, got hurt last season during I think the KU game. And that was also when Iowa State's defense hit that low spot and gave up all those points to the Jayhawks. So everybody talks about him as the best player, the most important player, perhaps just as important as the quarterback on Iowa State's defense. And you really see what happens when he's not able to go. If it's any past precedent, though, I wouldn't doubt Big Citrus in his ability to tough one out and play.
The game I was referring to, I think that was the game where they had two injuries in the secondary and got really banged up there. Kind of a self-inflicted wound on the side of the coaching staff, and that they left those guys in when Iowa State was, kind of gonna take care of the game, had it in hand there, and you got self-inflicted wounds as something to keep an eye on this week. What's the personal battle like in the mirror for the Cyclones in that regard this week?
Sure. Iowa State has traditionally been such a good team with the details. Matt Campbell has said on Tuesday that when our details are good, our team is good. That's when you look back at these successful seasons they've had, these successful runs. And that's just been lacking in Iowa State's past 2 games. It's out in the open. Everybody can see the penalties. Everybody can see these mistakes. Matt Campbell keeps talking about him. I feel like us in the media keep asking Matt the same questions. How do you fix it? And really, you got to just do it in practice and hope it applies. Have the mental toughness to make that apply on game day. So I am going to be curious to see if these self-inflicted penalties finally stop. Iowa State has had about half of its season penalties within the last 2 games, which, of course, the Iowa fans are watching our show, Ethan, and thinking, man, Iowa State was, perfection in that area against us. What the heck has happened? And I don't know is the true answer. Iowa State's defense has just been uncharacteristically unsound with some of these details. And I think it's going to matter a whole lot in terms of what the rest of this season look like if Iowa State's able to revert to what they were or if this is the new normal.
It's funny you mentioned sounding like a bit of a broken record with the questions you're asking Matt Campbell each week, and I had to fight really hard when I was writing my storylines for this Iowa Minnesota game to not talk about the passing game again. And I did manage to get 3 topics that I want to talk about. We're not going to talk about how poor the passing game looked against Penn State, who is a top 20 pass defense in college football. So we're not going to talk about that this week, even though it's still something you should be looking out. So that's my way of backdooring it into the discussion there. But my number one thing that I'm looking at when Iowa hosts Minnesota in the battle for Floyd of Rosedale, the 100-pound bronze pig, is does Iowa get the opening kickoff for one? This is you got to qualify it because if they end up kicking the ball to Minnesota to start, Minnesota looks to receive or whatever, then this entire point is moot because we can't look at it anymore. And then on top of that, can they start faster this time? They're 7 for 7 on getting the opening kickoff in games this season, and they've only managed to turn those possessions into 17 points. They have 2 touchdowns, one of which was a 100-yard kickoff return by Caden Weegan against Rutgers. And then outside of that, they've scored a touchdown against UMass and a field goal against UAlbany. 2 punts, 2 3-and-out punts, and 2 interceptions were the results of the other 2. So they're not a great team to start the game, particularly on offense. But Kirk Ferentz likes to elect to receive when they win the kickoff. So this isn't even something where the opposing team is choosing to kick the ball to them or deferring their decision to the second half. Iowa is winning the toss, electing to receive. And then like this weekend, Mark Gronowski looking to convert on a third down, throws a pass to Jacob Gill, gets tipped, and falls into the arms of a Penn State wide receiver or defensive back. And now the Nittany Lions have 35 yards that they need to go for their opening score. And so it's like it's really hurting Iowa that they've been so ineffective on these opening drives. And we asked Kirk about it on Tuesday, and he said, last season the coaches convinced me to defer. They made a really great convincing argument to defer to the second half, and so we did that in a game last year. He couldn't remember what game it was. I went and tracked it down. They only deferred twice last year. Once was against Illinois State in the season opener, and once was against Missouri in the bowl game. And he said that it didn't go very well, and he had an emotional reaction and said we're never doing that again. So they're back to his tradition was always electing to receive. They convinced him not to do that last year, and then it didn't go well for him, and so he reverted back to where he was always at. Against Illinois State, the offense looked horrible. I think a lot of people remember how poorly they played against the Redbirds. They only had a 6-0 lead going into the half against an FCS opponent. Ended up winning the game 40-0. So the second half went just fine for him. And Cade McNamara looked like the promised quarterback messiah for Iowa there for 1 week. And then against Missouri, they did perfectly fine with deferring. They had a 21-14 lead at the break, ended up losing 27-24. So I guess if you're Kirk Ferentz, you can find that it didn't work out for you because you deferred and you lost, right? But certainly in the Illinois State game, it didn't go their way with that decision against Missouri. Didn't go their way on the scoreboard. On the field, they looked fine. But so I'm just curious to see what the start looks like this week, especially with Kirk Ferentz being dead set on choosing to receive every opening kick.
Maybe Kirk Ferentz and I would just lose the toss, and all of the strategy just goes out the window. Wouldn't that make things so much simpler?
Well, that's kind of the thing we were talking about. We're trying to like strategize, like what maybe is the reasoning for this? And it was like, well, most of the time teams defer, which means they're basically picking to kick because they want the second half kickoff. And so maybe it's something that Kirk knows for 100% certainty or like 99% certainty that he will get the ball to start every game. And so it's something he can control, right? It's like one of those controllables that coaches are always talking about. And so maybe that's what's going on. And I kind of, mentioned when you set on College Football 26 your preference to receive the kick, you receive the kick 100% of the time because the computer always kicks the kick, chooses to defer, which is to kick the opening kickoff. And so it's like maybe that's what Kirk's philosophy is there. It's like, well, I just know we're going to get the ball so we can game plan around having the ball first. And so I don't think that's a horrible argument. It wasn't my original thought that I won't put it out there who said that unless they tell me it's all right. I'll circle back to this on Sunday. But I did think that was a reasonable thought that maybe it's just controlling the controllable.
Interesting. We'll all be on coin toss watch for Iowa's game on Saturday. What can you tell us about maybe what this game could mean for Iowa in terms of its national perception?
I saw a joke on X, a meme on X earlier where it was like the Office. There was two memes. It's not the Office, the show, but it was like the attractive guy goes to the lady and he does finger guns at her and she's like, oh, you're so sweet. And then the unattractive guy comes into her office, does the same thing, and she's like, oh, hello, human resources. And it was like all these 5-2 teams that the AP poll loves, like Notre Dame. I can't remember the other ones now, but Notre Dame was one of them. And then the 5-2 team on the bottom was Northwestern. And I kind of laughed to myself, like you could go ahead and add Minnesota and Iowa to this because those are two teams that combined have a grand total of one AP poll vote right now, despite being 5-2 and 3-1 in the Big Ten, each of them. So it's kind of interesting how these teams have had, on paper, a lot of success this year. But as I mentioned on Sunday, particularly with Iowa, the resume might be lacking. And so this second storyline that I want to talk about was, is this the game where Iowa or Minnesota, depending on who wins, finally gets some national respect? Minnesota is the one team with that AP poll vote right now. They beat number 25 Nebraska last Friday, kind of dominated the Huskers. Really, it was for as impressive a win as impressive as they looked in that win, and as bad as they made Nebraska look. I'm surprised they didn't get more pull in the AP poll. I'm not stunned that they're unranked, but the fact that they only have one vote is kind of crazy. And so I think that this is going to be an opportunity for Iowa, who's only the only team that they've beaten that has a conference win is UAlbany at this point. This is going to be an opportunity for them to improve to 6-2 and say, hey, we are legit. Oregon can't sleepwalk against us in 2 weeks. The Ducks need to be aware that we can beat anyone we play, and maybe the AP poll starts to take notice, and as some other teams take some more losses, maybe Iowa gets a little bit more national respect, or Minnesota. I'll say or Minnesota because the same thing can be true for the Gophers if they end up winning this game. Though, as I'll get into later, I don't think that's going to be the ultimate outcome.
I can't wait to find out why. One thing that matters so much in terms of these games, we talked about it with the Cyclones. The kicking game really matters, Ethan, and it's been a little suspect in Iowa City. What are you going to be looking for in that department?
Yeah, I was looking at the stats page trying to figure out the third thing that I was going to talk about that wasn't the passing attack. And I was like, well, let's talk about the kicking game again. I certainly haven't really harped on that a ton over the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And when I got to that part of the stats page on the Big Ten, I saw that Drew Stevens is actually tied for the most field goal makes in the Big Ten among qualified kickers at the moment. He's got 14. And I was like, oh, that's surprising. And then I just kind of followed the line over to his field goal percentage, and he was sitting at about 73.9 is I think where he was at. And I was like, well, that's not very good. Let's see who's the most accurate in the Big Ten. And I controlled for that, and he ended up the fourth worst in the Big Ten for accuracy this year at 73.9%. And so that is kind of what we're getting at. It's like there's no doubt that Drew Stevens is a weapon, and there's no doubt that he's got a ton of range, evidenced by the fact that Kirk Ferentz was comfortable going for a 66-yard field goal on Saturday for whatever reason. And he certainly looked like he maybe would have had the distance from about 60 yards with the way his first kick landed, not the one that got blocked, but the one that Penn State called a timeout to negate. And so I want to see how Iowa uses him now that it's proven to be an unreliable part of the Iowa special teams. It's like it's not Drew's fault. He's still the same kicker that did amazing last year, but the entire unit has proven to be unreliable. So how does Iowa choose to use that group this week? I think it'll kind of tell us where they feel confidence wise going against the Ducks. Do they go for a couple of fourth downs that they might not have last year or earlier in the season? Or do they punt in situations where maybe there should be a kick, or you would feel like there would maybe be a kick with a guy like Drew Stevens back there? And then also it'll be telling if they don't change anything because like when I asked LeVar Woods, the special teams coordinator, during the bye week, he still got a ton of confidence in Drew Stevens, and so maybe they just don't change anything, and they're comfortable just beating their heads against the wall until they break through the brick wall, like Cam Scatabo likes to do.
Boy, does he. Who could have seen that coming? I mean, the way he dominated the Big 12, I'm not at all surprised to see it.
Certainly not surprising, and I've spoiled my headlines a little bit, so they won't be very surprising, but we'll get into them right after this.
Love Island. Not really. No, I don't think so. No. Bring energy, be competitive, and win. Yeah. Business management. My sister's 42, so flip that around. My mom wore 20, my dad wore 40, so the 2 and the 4. Yeah.
Welcome back to CyHawk Talk here on a Wednesday, talking Sunday's headlines today. I already spoiled mine, so I'll go ahead and let Ben get to his because that's a little bit more out of the tantalizing prospect at the moment. What's it going to be for the Cyclones against the Cougars?
It's going to be a massive game, Ethan. And I've been picking the Cyclones all year long until I said they give me a reason not to. And from what I've seen the last 2 weeks, I just don't trust Iowa State in this position. Vegas hasn't favored. A little bit of a trap game for the Cougars, coming off of a big Holy War win in a hostile environment for freshman quarterback Bear Bachmeier. But I'm a believer in Bear, which is my first headline is bearing down. This young freshman has looked so good. The drop off, from what we thought BYU could be with a late quarterback shuffle has been non-existent. What he did in the final quarter of the Holy War, super impressive. That rushing touchdown, I think his legs could hurt Iowa State on Saturday. So I think Bear Bachmeier will lead BYU to a win on Saturday. And that means it's a streak. My second headline. This would be a third loss in a row for the first time for Iowa State since 2022. That's what the Cyclones are trying to avoid on Saturday, and we'll see if they can get it done. There's nothing easy ahead. My third headline for the Cyclones. It doesn't get easier than this. You got the defending Big 12 champs coming in, Arizona State next week. They got to go down to TCU. Kansas is never an easy game. And then the Cowboys, okay, that's a little bit of an easy one. But there's not going to be an easy road ahead. So if the Cyclones are able to not pull the upset, but get the win against an AP top 10 team, that doesn't mean they're out of the woods yet, but it could certainly inject a lot of life back into the season. Ethan, tell me about your headlines for Iowa's game against Minnesota.
Number one, Floyd's getting comfy. As I mentioned, the Floyd of Rosedale trophy is what the teams pass back and forth. Iowa leads the trophy series, I believe 45-43, and there were a couple ties in there as well. But Minnesota only won one of the last 10 matchups between these two teams, and it was pretty fraudulent, because we all remember what happened with Cooper DeJean and what was definitely not a fair catch. And since Kirk Ferentz arrived, since 2000, Minnesota's only won 5 matchups. So certainly it's been a pretty dominant rivalry for what Kirk Ferentz has been able to do with the Hawkeyes. So I think Floyd's going to keep getting a little bit more comfy. He's starting to have to pay rent in Iowa City. He's been here so long. So he's certainly getting comfortable. He might buy a new couch for the apartment he has at the football complex. And then number 2 is going to be MIA, Min Sack Attack. Gophers made a lot of headlines sacking Dylan Raiola 9 times in the win over Nebraska. Mark Gronowski had a eye-catching comment on Tuesday saying, well, I think maybe the quarterback they were playing against held the ball a little too long in certain situations. And that certainly was the perception of the Nebraska fans that I'm in a family group chat with. And I don't think that's going to be the case for the Gophers this week. I think that Mark Gronowski's mobility and his veteran presence will allow him to avoid some of those sacks. So I don't think they're going to get nearly as gaudy numbers, particularly also Iowa's offensive line, the best 5 players for the Hawkeyes this season, according to Pro Football Focus. So certainly something that I think I'm expecting. Maybe I'm not going to tell you to go bet 0 sacks for the Gophers, but I wouldn't be stunned to see a goose egg on the stat sheet on Sunday morning. And then the final one, Duck, Duck, Hawk. You're going to get a win against the Gophers, and then you're suddenly feeling like, hey, that Ethan guy that was saying, you're telling me there's a chance 3 weeks ago. I'm starting to like what he was saying, because I'm certainly feeling pretty good. Oregon's going to be a tough one, but they're hoping that they can be the winner, and they're going to turn all their attention towards the Ducks. They got a bye week. They got an extra week to prepare. Oregon also has a bye week, so we won't talk about how they have extra time to prepare. But I think that's going to be kind of the dominant discussion during the bye week. Last bye week, it was, is Mark going to play against Wisconsin? Is Mark going to be healthy for the rest of the year? I think it's going to be a little bit more exciting as you start dreaming up scenarios where Iowa beats Oregon and potentially is in the college football playoff discussion all of a sudden. And we go from what this week, they're not even in the AP discussion, AP poll discussion, to could they host a playoff game? Could they go to the Big Ten title game? All those sorts of things. So it'll, I think, be a fun bye week. And then before we wrap the show, I want to clarify. Hank Bachmeier, he wears a really weird quarterback number, right?
He does. Do you know what it is off the top of your head?
I think it's like 47.
Yeah, that sounds right.
I just remember seeing that going into the season, 47. It reminds me of like when Devin Gardner wore 98 at Michigan, and then like when Shea Patterson wore 20. He wore 20 at Ole Miss, right?
You're asking the wrong Hutchins twin. I'm not
I am
sure.
asking the wrong Hutchins twin, but I just always think it's really fun when quarterbacks wear those weird numbers, because it just reminds you of watching like the black and white footage on NFL films, and they're wearing ridiculous numbers. Like Dan Fouts, didn't he wear number 22 for the Chargers?
The lefty. That's all I know about Dan Fouts.
Well, it'll be I'm sure it'll be an
that'll-
adjustment for you to see 47 lining up under center.
for sure.
Thanks for watching. We'll be back on Sunday for a Sunday rewind to see how smart or dumb either of us are in projecting these games. But thank you for watching.